All right, let's jump right into this explainer. If you're planning a trip to Japan, or honestly, if you're just fascinated by the unspoken rules of different cultures, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're looking at a super interesting piece of source material. It's actually written by a Japanese local specifically for foreign tourists, and it pulls back the curtain on a cultural quirk that confuses pretty much everyone who visits, the Japanese personal space paradox. We're going to unpack the hidden logic of how people navigate each other in one of the most densely populated countries on the planet.
So, let's dive into the core of this. The author poses a really brilliant question, one they admit even they find kind of curious as a native Japanese person. Here's the paradox. Japanese people generally do not hug. They rarely shake hands. If a stranger accidentally brushes against them on the street, they'll instinctively step away. From the outside, it totally looks like a culture with this massive, impenetrable bubble of personal space, right? But then, every single morning, millions of commuters squeeze onto rush-hour trains, pressing full bodies against complete strangers in a way that would honestly cause a panic attack anywhere else. How on earth do these two extremes exist in the exact same culture?
It's genuinely fascinating to look at the general awkwardness around intentional physical touch in Japan. The author actually notes that they didn't even experience a real hug until they were well into adulthood. For the longest time, it was literally just something they saw in foreign movies. And even today, there's a lingering awkwardness about it. Handshakes? Highly uncommon. The author mentions the last time they shook hands was to mark the retirement of a senior colleague after years of working together. So it's reserved for highly significant moments, definitely not just a casual, nice-to-meet-you greeting.
To solve this mystery, we're going to follow a clear roadmap. First, the personal space paradox. Then, silent apologies and collisions. Third, the foreigner exception. Fourth, contact without connection. And finally, we'll wrap up with the hand chop gesture.
Section 1. Silent Apologies and Collisions. Navigating Crowded Stations. Imagine trying to get through a Tokyo station during the morning rush. With tens of thousands of people crossing paths, how does everyone avoid bumping into each other? Well, they don't. Collisions happen all the time.
But here's the catch. When a light shoulder brush happens on a crowded platform, the standard reaction is just total silence. Usually, you'll just see a small, distant hand raise, kind of like a little wave. No words are exchanged at all. Both people instantly understand the gesture and just keep walking without skipping a beat. These everyday interactions actually build into a strict, unspoken set of rules. As we just talked about, a light brush, that gets a silent hand raise. But what if you accidentally step on the back of someone's shoe? Now, in a lot of cultures, you'd immediately say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." In Japan, you actually ignore it. Seriously, you don't stop, you don't look back, you just keep the flow of traffic moving. And the person whose shoe you stepped on, they won't turn around either. However, rule number 3 is where it shifts. If someone actually stumbles or is about to fall because of the bump, everything changes. In that case, you stop and you apologize out loud. So the use of spoken words is literally directly proportional to the physical impact caused.
The source material gives us this absolutely fantastic, honest quote that really explains the logic behind this. It says, "Japan is small and crowded. Getting angry over every little thing would be exhausting." And honestly, when you think about it, that makes perfect sense. In a hyper-dense urban environment, everyone just intuitively knows that nobody is bumping into you on purpose. It's just an inevitable side effect of the geography and having so many people in one space.
Section 2. The foreigner exception. A shift in rules.
So what happens when the person you bump into isn't a Japanese local, but a tourist? Well, those unspoken rules we just talked about suddenly shift. The author reveals this really fascinating personal habit. When they bump into someone they recognize as a foreigner, an automatic "sorry" or "excuse me" just slips out. And get this, they say it in English, not Japanese. It's a completely subconscious reflex.
So why does this happen? Well, in a high-density culture like Japan, minor bumps are basically just background noise. But the author points out an interesting theory they heard about wide street cultures or even societies where gun ownership is common. In those environments, bumping into a stranger without acknowledging it verbally could easily be taken as an act of aggression or spark some serious anger. The exact same act of physical contact carries entirely different social weight depending on where you are. Because of this, Japanese locals intuitively adjust the social transaction when they're dealing with tourists, just to make absolutely sure no offense is taken.
Section 3. Contact without connection. Inside the rush hour train.
Now we've talked about the streets, but we need to tackle the most intense physical contact of all, the morning commuter train. Before we explain the train, though, we've got to clear up a pretty major misconception. It would be super easy to assume that Japanese people just hate physical touch in general, but that is absolutely false.
Family intimacy is incredibly common and totally natural. The author recalls sharing a futon with their parents as a child, touching feet under the heated kotatsu table in the winter, and sharing family baths for years. So the resistance we're seeing, it's not a resistance to physical touch itself.
So how in the world do they survive a train car so packed that you literally can't even reach into your pocket to grab your phone? It all comes down to an emotional switch. The author admits that on these trains, commuters essentially stop registering the people beside them as human beings. I know that sounds intense, but you treat others almost as objects, knowing they are doing the exact same thing to you. You flip a mental switch, close your eyes, and just endure the ride. It's this incredible psychological adaptation to city living. It's not coldness at all. It's a necessary coping mechanism. Honestly, it's probably why so many people can comfortably fall asleep standing up on these trains.
And this brings us right to the core answer of our paradox. What Japanese people are avoiding isn't physical contact. They are avoiding the formation of a relationship. Think about it. A hug or a handshake is intentional. It carries a super clear message. You and I are connected. That creates a social bond, which can feel unfamiliar and just a bit too heavy to establish with complete strangers. But that extreme, full-body contact on a rush-hour train, that is entirely incidental. It's purely accidental. No relationship is being formed, zero social bond is created, and because of that, the physical closeness is perfectly tolerable.
Which brings us to Section 4, the hand chop gesture, moving through crowds.
Okay, now that you understand the psychology behind all this, let's give you a practical tool for your next trip. How do you actually move through these massive crowds without constantly bumping into people or having to shout, "Excuse me," every 5 seconds? Well, to understand this trick, you first need to understand the concept of ma. This roughly translates to the Japanese sense of space, or the gap between things. You can think of it as the invisible, unspoken space that exists between people in a crowd. And this concept leads us directly to the hand chop. You will see this literally everywhere in Japan. When someone needs to cut through a dense crowd, they'll extend one hand forward, holding it flat like a gentle little karate chop, and smoothly slice through the gap between two people. They don't say a single word, but the message is instantly, universally received by everyone around them. "Excuse me, I am passing through."
So, why use this gesture instead of just saying, "excuse me," in Japanese? Well, going back to what we just learned, if you use spoken words to ask someone to move, you are initiating a connection. You're forcing a brief social relationship. But if you use the silent hand chop to manipulate that invisible ma space, you transmit your intention perfectly without ever triggering a relationship. The silence does all the heavy lifting for you. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Japan is really often categorized by anthropologists as a non-contact culture. But as our local author points out, being a non-contact culture and dealing with the reality of packed trains aren't actually contradictory at all. In high-density environments, there is just an incredibly high tolerance for anonymous, incidental contact. It's simply a different kind of contact entirely, one that relies on silence, strict emotional boundaries, and a shared, unspoken understanding of how to navigate shared space.
It really makes you think about the invisible rules we follow every single day without even realizing it, doesn't it? Have you ever been on a packed train in Japan, or even just pressed against strangers in your own city? How did it feel? And more importantly, how do people in your country navigate personal space with strangers? Take a moment to think about the unspoken rules you follow when you walk down the street today. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a whole new perspective the next time you find yourself navigating a crowd.
あなたの体験をぜひ聞かせてください。コメント欄に書き込んでね。